The problem with universities did not start with Jason Arday. There's something about the Jason Arday controversy that I think is getting lost. People are asking perfectly reasonable questions about his qualifications, his academic work, and how somebody facing these kinds of allegations managed to reach such a prestigious position. Those questions should be asked. But there seems to be another assumption hiding underneath some of the commentary, that universities normally operate as perfect meritocracies, that everybody standing in front of the lecture theatre is there because they're exceptionally knowledgeable, that every promotion reflects ability, that institutions rigorously remove people who aren't competent, and therefore, if Jason Arday reached Cambridge without being everything people thought he was, something extraordinary must have happened. Perhaps diversity corrupted the system. Perhaps standards were lowered. Perhaps universities became so obsessed with representation that they stopped caring about competence. I have a problem with that argument. That description of universities doesn't resemble the university system that I've actually experienced. Some of my lecturers were atrocious. I can only speak from my own experience, but during my time at university, I had some lecturers who were genuinely atrocious. And for clarity, every lecturer I'm talking about here is white. I'm not saying they're bad because they're white. Their race has absolutely nothing to do with their competence. That's precisely my point. Nobody ever treated their lack of competence as a racial issue. There were lecturers teaching subjects they didn't appear to understand at the level I would expect from somebody employed to teach them at a university. Out of all the lecturers I've had, I can honestly say only one struck me as somebody who knew his subject inside out. One. Others were effectively reading material from lynda.com word for word. For younger viewers, lynda.com was basically an online training platform for software and creative skills. We were paying university fees, sitting inside a university classroom where lecturers were essentially delivering tutorials that we could have accessed ourselves. Worse still, some of their software knowledge was already outdated. And when you're studying technology or creative software, outdated knowledge becomes a serious problem very quickly. But there was one lecturer in particular who stood out. During our lab sessions, he would spend just about the whole time of the session sitting on Facebook. That was the level of engagement. The strange thing is that he appeared to know another piece of software reasonably well. The problem was, it wasn't the software we were supposed to be learning. We were there to develop practical skills in a specific program, but the person responsible for teaching us couldn't properly support us in using it. Students complained, concerns were raised. Eventually, things became so bad that during one lecture, everybody got up and walked out. People simply couldn't see the point in staying. After that, many students stopped attending these sessions altogether. Not because they didn't care about their education, because they didn't believe they were getting an education in that room. Guess what happened to that lecturer? He's now a senior lecturer. Years later, nothing's changed. And this simply isn't an old story from when I was a student. Over the years, I've encountered students who ended up being taught by that same lecturer. And when we talk about their experience, I realize that very little appears to have changed. Same problems, same frustrations, same lack of useful teaching. But now the person has progressed further through the institution. So when I hear people talk about Jason Arday as though universities suddenly discovered incompetence because diversity arrived, I have to ask, where have these people been? Let's say for the sake of argument that the strongest criticisms of him eventually proved justified. Let's say serious mistakes were made in his appointment or progression. It might prove Cambridge's process failed. It might expose weaknesses in recruitment. It might expose weaknesses in academic supervision. It might show that somebody became very good at navigating institutional systems. What it wouldn't prove is that black people aren't qualified for academia. And it certainly wouldn't prove that incompetent people entered universities only after diversity policies appeared. I personally experienced poor white lecturers long before Jason Arday's name meant anything to me. Nobody called those lecturers diversity hires. Nobody suggested their incompetence reveals something about white intellectual ability. Nobody started investigating whether white people had been promoted beyond their natural capabilities. They were simply poor lecturers. And that is exactly how individual incompetence should be understood. William O'Reilly makes the point even clearer. You can see something similar in Cambridge itself. William Riley was found by a university tribunal to have plagiarized more than 12 pages from essays written by one of his undergraduate students. He had supervised the students, he had marked the essays, yet material from those essays appeared in work published under his own name. Cambridge upheld the complaint but concluded that the plagiarism resulted in negligence rather than deliberate misconduct. He retained his position. Now, people can argue about whether that decision was correct, but what interests me is what didn't happen. Nobody said this proves white academics are frauds. Nobody started questioning the employment of white professors. Nobody argued that white representation in universities had gone too far. The institution dealt with an individual case. That's the difference. If Jason Arday exposes institutional weaknesses, investigate institutional weaknesses. So yes, ask questions about Jason Arday. Ask whether his work met the standards expected of somebody holding his position. Ask how appointments were made. Ask whether warning signs were missed. Those are legitimate questions. But don't tell me his case proves that universities only started employing questionable academics when black people entered the room. I've sat in those classrooms. I've watched lecturers read tutorials word for word. I've dealt with outdated teaching. I've watched somebody sit on Facebook while students were supposed to be receiving practical instruction. I've watched students complain. I've watched an entire classroom walk out. I've watched one of those same lecturers eventually become a senior lecturer. Every lecturer I'm talking about was white. But let's examine the institution, not an entire race.